a seizure at work. Although my seizure was due to another unfortunate virus, I had the swine flu of all things.
Oh my
It
goodness.
had compromised my medication, and my threshold of medication had dropped. My job said, you can no longer park in the parking lot because you are now a liability. And I was like, but the state of Pennsylvania says I can drive. How can you supersede that humiliation of walking across that street every day and having to explain to, coworkers and parents why I was not parking in the parking lot? Really, compounded that thought of like, I am not talking about this ever again in the workplace.
This is The Didlake Difference, the show all about creating and promoting opportunities for people with disabilities. Each episode will bring you expert insights and relatable topics that ignite meaningful conversations and inspire change within our communities.
All right, this is the first time we've done like a virtual episode, so it's a bit of a learning curve for us.
Glad to be the guinea pig. Absolutely.
Thank you. So Bernice, welcome to the Didlake Difference.
Thank you. So glad to be here.
Yeah,
Thank
so
you for the invitation.
of course. So you are joining us all the way from Ohio, correct?
Correct.
Awesome.
Columbus, Ohio.
So my understanding is that the reason that we connected in the first place was that you actually met our marketing manager, Lakia, and you met at a conference in DC, correct? And that was kind of how you got that initial connection.
Absolutely. I met Lakia at the AWS Imagine conference, which is their nonprofit focus conference, where I was the keynote. And like with all conversations, I start my presentation with, I am Bernice Martin Lee and I live with epilepsy. And that really impacted Lakia that I was so open about my disability, and her and I were able to have a great conversation after that.
That's amazing. And I want to go back to what you've just said about how you start your keynote speeches. That is incredible. Tell me a little bit about that. Tell me a little bit about your story, your experiences. What has led you to where you are today?
Well, it's been a journey, as we all talk about in the space of epilepsy. It really is a journey because it can ebb and flow, stop and start along the way. But I had my first seizure in college, um, and I was not diagnosed till about 3 years later with epilepsy after my fifth seizure, which is typical of our community. Unfortunately, uh, and this happened 30 years ago at the age of 19, and there wasn't cell phones, so no one was recording the seizure. So it basically was all word of mouth about how you described it. And unfortunately, as the patient, you don't remember the seizure. So you're not able to accurately describe it. So it took multiple seizures for a physician to finally diagnose me with epilepsy. And since that time, I've encountered stigma along the way, particularly in the workplace. Uh, and that is why it's so important to me that I start my keynote with that acknowledgement of my disability. Because there was a time where I did not disclose my disability, particularly in the workplace, because of the stereotypes and myths around epilepsy, such as intellectual inabilities, cognitive compromise, which are not true of most individuals living with epilepsy. We are a spectrum disorder. But in times, because of my epilepsy, there were incidences, particularly in the workplace, that I was challenged with. One particular was when I was working for an organization that dealt with young people living with learning disabilities, many that had the comorbidity of epilepsy. And I had a seizure at work. And when I returned, although my seizure was due to another unfortunate virus, I had the swine flu of all things.
Oh my goodness.
But it had compromised my medication, and my threshold of medication had dropped. But it was a easy fix to get me back to the place where I would have seizure control. But my job said, you can no longer park in the parking lot because you are now a liability.
Oh my goodness. Wow.
And I was like, but the state of Pennsylvania says I can drive. How can you supersede that? But again, I was a mom of three, and I couldn't afford not to work, so I just abided by the request of the organization to park across the street. But that humiliation of walking across that street every day and having to explain to, coworkers and parents why I was not parking in the parking lot, really, compounded that thought of like, I am not talking about this ever again in the workplace.
Hmm.
Like, I'm not going to talk about this. And so that was, almost 20 years ago. And it wasn't until I was approached by the Epilepsy Foundation through the recruiting process did I was I even challenged to talk about it again.
Hmm.
I know in taking this role, I was going to have to share my own story. And I will tell you, I went into the interview process with great hesitation because I wasn't quite sure I was ready to do so. But what I found in the board at the National Board of Directors at the Epilepsy Foundation was it was the first time I experienced people who understood and embraced my story. And I found that to be so powerful. Um, and I want to make sure I share that with others. And so that's why it's so important when I start a keynote or a talk that I talk about the fact that I live with epilepsy, because I want to give that same power to others that was given to me by my board of directors.
Amazing. And so when you talk about that stark contrast between the way that that organization where you had your seizure reacted to the organization that, where you are now, it seems like they at first, like that first organization operated out of fear, right? They operated out of the unknown. So
Absolutely.
how do you approach a situation where they just don't have the education and the knowledge, therefore they just have the stigma and they try to protect themselves, but in that they're really harming the person who is actually experiencing that disability, that episode.
Yeah, absolutely. And so at the Epilepsy Foundation, uh, our vision is so no one faces epilepsy alone. And part of that is making sure that people are empowered to use their voice, that we create community in which they feel supported in telling their story and using their voice. Because you're absolutely right. It's only through education that we begin to see the elimination of stigma, particularly in the workplace and in society overall. And so, again, we really support individuals in making sure that they have all the tools and resources so that they are well educated and that they can educate others. And one of those methods is through our learning system, our LMS, where we have everything on that LMS from seizure first aid training and recognition training to how to talk about your epilepsy with a coworker or a colleague or with your supervisor. And then we also offer what is our defense fund, which helps individuals learn how to have those conversations in the workplace and also what their rights are within the workplace, because you're right, we have to build awareness within the community, but also the individual living with epilepsy has to understand what their rights are
Yeah,
so they can fully advocate for themselves within the workplace.
100%. And so what does that kind of look like? What does that look like for organizations, for the people that the Epilepsy Foundation is serving?
So what it means is, understanding what accommodations an employer can give its employees and what you can ask for appropriately. And again, everyone living with epilepsy has their own journey. And because we are a spectrum disorder, that means your epilepsy may present in a different way. So it really has to be unique to your situation. But if you need to take breaks from your computer screen, you can ask for that, right? If you need to have if you cannot work in what we call fluorescent lighting for long periods of time, you can ask for an accommodation for that. If you are someone who has nocturnal seizures and they affect your mornings, you can ask for a schedule shift. That doesn't mean that you have to be at work at 8 o'clock in the morning, right? Because you've experienced seizures overnight. So those are the accommodations that we encourage individuals to talk about. But again, it has to be individualized to their epilepsy. But we believe it starts with a partnership, right? It's very hard. Like I said, I did not disclose for over 2 decades. So first, it's about how do you disclose appropriately, right? What does that look like in the workplace? What do you have to disclose? What don't you have to disclose? Right? Because have you ever seen the application where some applications will say, "Have you ever experienced a seizure?" You do not have to disclose that you live with epilepsy, but it's on applications, and we've seen many times where individuals have honestly answered that question and have not gotten a call back.
Wow.
Right? And so we say, as opposed, and I'm not giving legal advice in any way, but it may be better to have that conversation with the Human Resource Office prior to answering that question that may determine whether or not you're eligible for the role. Because you could have had a seizure 10 years ago and be completely seizure free, but the question doesn't present that way.
Mhm.
Right? So we always encourage them have the conversation with the Human Resource Office. And if you have any questions, to reach out to the Epilepsy Foundation so we can give you advice and guidance through that.
Thank you so much for providing that information, Bernice. And I want to go back a little bit about how epilepsy and living with epilepsy has shaped your leadership and the way that you act as a CEO today.
Oh, I think it's central to my leadership at the Epilepsy Foundation because we truly believe individuals with lived experience are the experts,
Mhm.
right? They are the experts and they should be treated as such. So it's about empowering people to use their expertise to support not only themselves and their families, but also to support innovation and research in our space because you are the expert. And so we lean heavily into the patient voice and to the patient need, right? We are very patient centric at the Epilepsy Foundation. And that means my leadership always has to rely on what I've learned from the community. So I take a lot of my time, I travel about 60% of my time to visit with our community to understand what their needs are, but also what they're experiencing through either their clinical visits or through the workplace so that we can provide better support and tools to help manage that. Um, I always reflect on the empathy that I wish I would have received in the workplace and from leaders that I've worked with. And I try to make sure we provide that empathy to our associates. We have a theme with our leadership team. We lead with joy, right? But we also lead with empathy. We have several individuals in the organization that are living with epilepsy. And again, those accommodations I spoke about earlier, we try to make sure that those are available to our associates as well. So they are able to maintain their careers while living with epilepsy. And they can share that information with others. And I know that's a different perspective than most CEOs who see a job description and say, this is the job description and you can't deviate from that. I'm like, okay, well, how do we know this person has the talent and expertise that we need. How can we accommodate their journey with epilepsy and still make sure that we're bringing in that expertise and talent that we need as an organization to serve the rest of the community?
So it's amazing that you say that because I think with Didlake we have that in common where it's like we see the people that are experiencing the so people that have disabilities, they are the experts in whatever it is that they're facing, right? And so at Didlake we also have that shared value in common that it's like you have to give people the opportunity to advocate, you have to give people the opportunity to showcase that they are able to do things in spite of their disability, in addition to their disability. And
Right.
so, what sort of advice would you give somebody? Because they don't often see people with disabilities in leadership roles, or some people may think that they're not capable of that. So, what sort of advice would you give to people that are in that sort of situation?
Sure. Again, you I am a person living with with a disability, but I am a person first. right? It is a part of who I am holistically. It is not all of me. So, the advice I would give to individuals living with disabilities is lean into who you are fully, right? Do not let your disability define you. You can define it, right, in the role that it plays in your life. But it doesn't negate the fact that you have hopes and dreams and ambition and talent and expertise, right? And that's what you should be talking about. And when someone tries to diminish you to your disability, make sure that you're talking about who you are holistically. I am a mother, I am a CEO, I am a wife, and I also live with epilepsy, right? It is a part of who I am, but it is not all of who I am. And again, it's really important. The advice I give is give yourself permission to accept your own limitations regarding your disability. There's many a times, and I know many others who I've talked to face this. We think we have to do more to prove that we're capable, right? We have to always be present. We have to overachieve in many areas, and sometimes we don't take time for ourselves. Particularly with epilepsy, I know I have triggers: dehydration, exhaustion, stress. And it's important for me to understand that those triggers prevent me from being my best self. And so I've had to learn to be very open with others when my triggers are present and when I'm experiencing, particularly an aura. And that's been very challenging because I feel very vulnerable in those times that people are judging me for my disability. But in order to empower other people to do so as well around me, I have to be an example of that. I know my chief of advocacy hates when I tell this story. She just cringes every time because one time we were in the office and I had been going all day from like 7 in the morning all day, and I had a late meeting at 5 o'clock, and we were in our advocacy offices, and there was no water. And as I said, my one of my triggers is dehydration, and I was drinking tea and Diet Coke, but there was absolutely no water in the building. Like there wasn't a water fountain, there weren't bottles of water. And so I was ending my day with a call with my some of my donors, and I felt like what was an aura was coming on. And I had to make a decision in that moment to take care of myself. Um, and that was very difficult because, again, I'm the CEO, I'm the leader of the organization. And here I am with the dilemma: do I continue with this call and fulfill my duties, or do I take care of myself? And I had to trust that those individuals on the call would understand that I needed to take care of myself. So I exited the call, and was able to go find what I needed. The running joke is now that every time I go to the office, there's like a 38 pack of water in the refrigerator.
Like, not on our watch. Not again.
It'll never happen again. But that was very difficult for me. And I understand others with disabilities have that same dilemma of when you're in those situations, do you disclose? Do you ask for that grace and permission to take care of yourself? Or do you push through and maybe jeopardize your own health in the process? And my advice is always choose yourself. Take care of you. And educate those along the way so that they have an understanding and empathy of what you're going through in those moments. Because they're not, I think many people think that, oh, people think that's an excuse. And I don't want people to think I make excuses. But I lean into, you can't pour from an empty cup, right? You have to take care of yourself first so that you can present as your best self and be the true leader that you are.
Exactly. So, I mean, first of all, I appreciate the vulnerability and the honesty so much. It's very inspiring because it shows that you are able to overcome any of those moments that you have felt have been moments of weakness, but from the outside are moments of strength. Putting yourself first in those scenarios are moments of strength.
Absolutely.
And so from an organizational standpoint, say an organization like Didlake, how can organizations what can they do to be able to support individuals in order to reach their full potential?
I really believe it's teaching individuals how to use their voice. Um, we have found that that's some of the most difficult work to do because there's so many variables in which individuals are being taught to do the exact opposite, to shrink. So I would encourage to Didlake to provide advocacy courses so that individuals can learn how to do that because it's not innate, it's not organic. Someone has to teach you how to do that
Yeah.
and when to do it and how to do it effectively. And so anytime you can empower somebody with those tools on how to use their voice and also knowing the rights of individuals living with disabilities, that is always going to make their journey so much easier.
Right.
Like they're not trying to figure it out for themselves.
That's a big thing, is not trying to figure it out for themselves, feeling
Hmm.
supported, feeling that they are not alone. I think that is a huge takeaway from what you have said, is that nobody ever has to face anything that they're going through alone.
Absolutely. I mean, epilepsy is such a isolating disorder. And we've seen it time and time again. 1 in 3 individuals living with epilepsy experience anxiety and depression. And we realize that is from not being able to share their story. One of the biggest issues with living with epilepsy is you never know when the next seizure is coming. Like you just don't know. So it's important for those around you to be able to support you because you don't know.
Right.
Right. And when you feel supported, when individuals feel, when you know that people are educated about your disorder and are able to support you if and when it should happen, your anxiety is lowered, right? And you are able to be more of yourself. I know I spent many days just wondering when the next seizure would come and how people would react in that moment. I've had my ribs broken because I had a seizure while I was at a restaurant and the gentleman performed the Heimlich because he didn't know what a seizure looked like.
Oh gosh.
He assumed I was choking.
Oh
He was attempting to help. I mean, he had training. It was just not the right training.
no. He had good intentions.
The best intentions. He jumped right into action. Um, and my poor colleague who was with me was devastated because she didn't know what to do. And I realized with that, like, that's why seizure first aid training is so important to be socialized in our community. People should know what to do when someone has a seizure. 1 in 26 individuals live with epilepsy in this country. 3.4 million individuals. 1 in 10 individuals will have a seizure in their lifetime. Recognizing how common it is for someone to have a seizure and for the majority of our communities not to know how to respond to it, right?
Right.
When people feel educated, they are calmer in those situations and they can be more supportive. So, with whatever disability you're dealing with, I always advocate that you educate those around you on how they can help. Whether it be in your workplace, whether it be in your academic centers, whether it be within your family, your churches, it's really important to educate those around you about how to respond to your disability. Because when they're calmer, right, and when they're more educated, the support will be much more profound than it ever has been before.
Right. No, I think that, so I'm 25, and I think that I have been in a space where I've seen 4 different people have seizures. And each time I've noticed that the reaction has been different, like because people don't really have a proper gauge of how to accurately support. So I definitely agree with you in that, had we been given any sort of education on this, then we would know how to react in a calmer manner, in a quicker manner. But instead, you kind of stand there stunned and you're like, oh my goodness. But putting into perspective that it's 1 in 26 and how common that is, no, it's insanely important to have that education and that, just the opportunity to do better once you do learn. So I think that it's really important for any organization that can provide those resources to provide those resources for
And
their people.
we're working. We have legislation in 28 states. Seizure safe schools, which now mandate that all school personnel are trained in seizure first aid,
That's
right?
incredible. Yeah.
Um, because imagine those young people in those classrooms and no one knowing how to respond,
Hmm.
right? How unsafe it is for the young person and how scary it is for every other child in that classroom. And we've had so many parents and students take it upon themselves to train their class in seizure first aid. And again, that information is available on our LMS. If anyone would like to go and take the training, it's about 30 minutes long. It is a certified program. You will get your nice certificate at the end that you can post in your office. And we encourage people to post it in their office, post it in their school, because then someone living with epilepsy knows that there's someone there that knows how to properly respond. And they may be more apt to share their story when they know that there's someone there that knows how to respond.
Exactly.
So again, another plug for seizure first aid training. Go to epilepsy.com, take the training because you don't know what that does for someone living with epilepsy to know that someone knows what to do if something happens to them.
Yes. Thank you. Thank you for sharing that. We'll need to put that somewhere over here for everybody to click on that, to follow that link. 30 minutes is nothing, and you get so much valuable information out of it. So that is incredible.
And it's also about recognition because everyone assumes that a seizure is a clonic tonic seizure, where you see the jerking motions, the eyes rolling, but that's not the only type of seizure that exists. And so it's important to know what an absence seizure is and many other types of seizures. So you can recognize that and also support an individual living with epilepsy because everyone just assumes it's a clonic tonic.
Mm. Yeah. See, simple things like that make the world of a difference. Thank you so much for sharing that. I really appreciate
No, you're
it.
welcome. And you know, and also with other disorders and disabilities, I know other advocacy groups offer similar trainings. So, you know, the more trainings that you can take to understand what someone else's journey may be is always going to be able to support them.
100%. I think education is the first step to anything. Like that
Mhm.
is what's going to propel a mission forward, regardless of what it is, regardless of who is involved.
And I wish I would have had that education for my family and for my coworkers. As I talked about that situation that I went through, I think being able to provide training and education to that staff would have alleviated that fear that I was a liability, right? They would have had a better understanding. But, you know, I didn't have access to that type of resource then. And so I really encourage individuals living with a disability to know what type of resources they have in their communities that can help support them as well and help support educating others.
Exactly. I know that Didlake does have a lot of disability training that they are able to provide their staff. So honestly, hearing that that makes a difference, and honestly, being in a space where I've seen that make a difference, being a part of an organization that does provide that, it helps. It makes you feel more reassured, and any organization that can do that definitely should.
Yeah, I mean, it makes a world of difference. And again,
Yep.
you talk about my experience as a CEO and in leadership in the disability community. It's also understanding where we have shortcomings,
Mm.
right? And what more we need to do in the community. Uh, because so many people are living in isolation with their disability. And what can we do to make sure that their stories are heard and that we're taking action to change the perspective and the narrative in the community around individuals living with disabilities, especially right now, right? When someone says a disability, people, you know, it's always the most extreme, right? But it affects the entire disability community when those stereotypes and myths are pervasive in our community.
Exactly, exactly. And what we want is equal employment for all. Like full stop. That
Yeah,
is what we want.
absolutely, absolutely. And you know, earlier this year, the Epilepsy Foundation put out a statement because there were indications that those living with epilepsy were working in federal positions, and in some ways they were not qualified. And we again support equal opportunities for employment, right? Yes, there are individuals with living with epilepsy that have limitations, but that does not apply to our community as a whole. And those opportunities should be afforded, those employment opportunities should be afforded to anyone who has the talent, skill, and expertise to perform those duties.
Exactly. Exactly. That's what it's all about.
Absolutely. I mean, I'm very lucky to have found this role where I can, really focus on equity in the epilepsy space.
Mhm.
It's important to me. It's what I'm passionate about. I came to this role from healthcare where I was working on health equity frameworks. And being able to focus this on the epilepsy community and the disability community overall has been such a gift for me because you recognize that when there's inequities that exist, people suffer. Right? And I don't think people think about that. When there's an inequity, someone is suffering. And we have to make sure that, again, to your point, that we provide e- equal opportunity for all individuals living with disabilities to have the best quality of life. Right? It's about their, and we don't prescribe to what that quality of life is, but it is their best quality of life. In our community, for some with our severe epilepsy or rare disorders, it may be just enjoying time with their family and being cognizant and aware to do that. But for others, it may be taking on leadership roles like myself. That is their best quality of life.
Yeah. So I actually wanted to ask you, what is something that has surprised you within your role as being a CEO?
You know, um, a lot has surprised me. I think what has surprised me the most is the lack of funding
Mm,
for not only the epilepsy community but for disabilities community overall.
hmm.
Although we have the ADA Act, it does not provide funding and support for communities. It's very dispersed throughout the federal government and throughout communities overall. So, again, how do we make progress if we're not focused on innovation and research to support communities? So, that's probably what surprised me the most.
Right. Well, thank you for sharing that. And yeah, as you've said, that is incredibly important. And it's like, how do we move forward? How do we, especially being in the disability advocacy space, the disability employment space, how do we put ourselves in those spaces and propel when we might not be receiving that external support, right? So,
And also, I think what it causes in our communities is then we're competing for a very small amount of funding, right?
mm,
And so, what I would love to see happen more in this space is more collaboration, where those in the patient advocacy space are collaborating and supporting one another and one another's initiatives. Um, for far too long, I feel like we've been siloed in that way. And it's important for us to acknowledge that while funding may be limited, uh, coming together, we call it the power of us, coming together will help us educate and hopefully inspire others to give and support the causes that we so deeply believe in.
yes, that is so true. And honestly, community partnerships are so important. And regardless of where you are, that's possible. It can happen. Like we're sitting here, you're in Ohio, we are in Northern Virginia, and we're talking about these things that are important and they unify and they hopefully inspire others to do the same. So it's how it starts. Community partnerships are incredibly important. Yeah.
Absolutely. And also sharing of information. I love this conversation that we're having today. Being able to share information to strengthen our knowledge base and to strengthen our ability to support communities.
Exactly, exactly. And so I wanted to ask you, Bernice, what does advocacy look like for you, whether that's on a personal level, on an organizational level? I know you've spoken a bit about that already, but if you have anything more to elaborate with that.
Sure, the Epilepsy Foundation has a very rich and deep advocacy platform from both the federal level to the local level to grassroots. And how that takes shape is that we do advocacy at the federal level. Particularly right now, we're advocating regarding the support and maintaining of funding for the epilepsy programs. I'm not sure if you're aware, but the epilepsy programs at the CDC were eliminated last year, and so we are working to restore those programs, and that is happening through our federal program, our federal advocacy efforts. And then we have our local advocacy efforts, which I talked about Seizure Safe Schools being one of those, where we're trying to make sure that students are safe within their classrooms. but also we're trying to make sure that there is coverage, appropriate coverage for devices and medication for those that live with epilepsy at the state level through their Medicaid programs. And then we have our grassroots programs, which are those in communities in which they are looking for funding to support, whether it be a community program or other efforts such as community healthcare workers to support individuals living with epilepsy. My personal advocacy happens on all levels. Um, I often lobby on the Hill and talk with our congressmen and senators about how they can support our community. We have an epilepsy caucus, which is chaired by Senator Schmidt and Senator Klobuchar in the Senate, and Senator Murphy and Senator Costa in the House. And with them, we are able to talk with many of our legislators about the needs of our community and help to find solutions through federal funding to move those to come to resolution for this for those individuals. Also, personally, I believe that advocacy is also my professional and my personal journey. So it's important for me in my own community and my own family to talk about epilepsy because as we talk about it, we normalize the conversation.
Mhm.
So people feel comfortable. There's 1 in 26. I went 15 years in my journey without meeting anyone else living with epilepsy, right? Because nobody talked about it,
Mhm.
right? And it's amazing now when I'm in the community and I start my conversation with, I live with epilepsy. Even at that conference where Lakia and I met, I had 25, 30 people come up to me afterwards and say, my brother has epilepsy, my sister has epilepsy, my dad has epilepsy, I have epilepsy. It's like all of us are in this room, but this may be the first time they're talking about it,
Right. It,
right?
it gives them that strength to be able to say, hey, actually, like this should be normalized.
Right. I can have this conversation,
Exactly.
can talk about it, and I can, in talking about it, I can find the resources that I need for myself or for my loved one.
Mm-hmm.
Now we're talking about it.
Exactly.
Right. When we tell that statistic of 1 in 26, most are shocked.
Right.
So they're like, wait a minute, that's my classroom size.
Mm-hmm.
Right. If I'm sitting in a classroom, someone in here is living with epilepsy
Exactly. Yes.
and they're not talking about it.
Right.
And many of us, let's be honest, me being one of them, were told not to talk about it. Right. When I was diagnosed, my grandmother, who I'm named after, who I was very, very close to, started saying things like she has fits, she has spells. And what that did was teach me there was something shameful about my disorder. So whether it was directly or indirectly, I was told not to talk about it, not to share it, because somebody would see me as less than. And so now I'm talking about it freely, and I wish I would have had this education and this posture much sooner because I know my children and my husband, I inadvertently taught them not to talk about it, right? And when my husband finally said to me after taking this role, he said, "I'm so glad we can talk about this, like openly." So advocacy isn't just, with legislation, it's also within your own family. It's also within your own community and making people very comfortable with the fact that you live with a disability and it's okay. And you can talk about it. And if they
Exactly.
have questions, you can help answer them.
No, I'm sure this conversation will fall onto many laps that people will hear it and be so inspired by the fact that had you not started, like you are the prime example of if you want change, you have to see change happen. So if you want people to start talking about it, you have to be vulnerable. You have to start talking about it. And so thank you so much for sharing that. And I'm really glad that, despite having that difficult beginning to it, you're here now and you're able to sit and have these conversations. And so I wanted to ask you, Bernice, who or what inspires you to keep moving forward?
Wow, good question. I would honestly say it's my children, right? I have 3 kids, 2 girls and a boy, and I have a grandchild.
Oh, congrats.
I'm about to have another one. So,
Congrats. That's so cute.
um, and for me, I always think about how do I want them to see me and what do I want to give to them? right? How do I want, what can I give to them that is going to enrich their lives? And so when I think about what I do on a day-to-day basis, I always think about what example I'm leaving for them. I mean, they're adults now. My youngest is 21, but I know watching how I carry myself in the world will also impact how they carry themselves in the world. I'm very proud of my kids. My oldest is a resident in surgery and is making an amazing impact with pediatric surgery, and I'm so proud of her. My middle daughter is in her PhD studies in ministry in theology, and she's just an amazing person and an amazing mom. And then my youngest is at Morehouse College as a senior. And when I saw him this summer take an internship where he was lobbying on the Hill, I couldn't have been more proud because I know that um, fighting for others will continue to be a family legacy, right, in our family. And so when you ask me what drives me, what motivates me, it really is those three. And of course, my husband, who is the backbone of our family. But really, like you said, I want my children to be change makers. And in order to encourage them to do that, I have to be a change maker.
That is incredible. Thank you. And so, what is one takeaway from all of the amazing, incredible things that you've shared with us today? What is one takeaway that you would like for our listeners to have before we leave today?
Oh, wow, we talked about so much.
So much.
I mean, honestly, it's what you and I kept coming back to. It's about education and awareness. Educate yourself. And when you're educated, provide that awareness for the community, right? That is the best advocacy that anyone can do is when they're educating others. And for those who are living with a disability, it's okay to be vulnerable. And I know it's difficult sometimes because we always feel like we're being judged. But know that there is power in your vulnerability.
Thank you so much for sharing. And thank you so much for your time today, Bernice. I have deeply enjoyed this conversation.
Well, I appreciate you, and I appreciate you doing this work because it's so important that individuals have a safe space to talk and to listen. Many don't get this opportunity, so I am very grateful to you.